Today we're going to be working on this beautiful cloud image from a recent road trip that I took. I couldn't help but photograph these gorgeous clouds, and I can't wait to show you how the painting comes together. The first thing you'll notice that this is not UArt. This is actually a piece of Pastelmat from a pad that I just recently purchased. It's about 7 by 9.5. Of course, it's a French brand, and so they measure mostly by the centimeter. But the first thing I noticed, I haven't used this paper in a really long time, and it has a fuzzy texture on it instead of a gritty texture like UArt. And I've read a lot about this paper. Like I said, I haven't used it in a while, so I'd kind of forgotten the texture of it. But one of the things I first noticed was right now I'm blocking in my major shape of that cloud, and the graphite doesn't transfer quite as dark onto this paper as it does when it is on a more sanded surface like the UArt, using the same amount of pressure, but it's a very light mark. Of course, it's going to be easily covered with pastel, but that was obviously immediately noticeable. But I am doing the same thing, blocking in the shapes. Of course, I'm wanting to focus mostly on this large cloud with the beautiful setting sun behind it, the light that is within the cloud. And with that, I'm making sure that my horizon line is very low so as not to center that horizon line. The reason for that is when you center a horizon line, the viewer doesn't really know if they should be focusing more on the sky or more on the land. And so whenever you're deciding for your references, increasing the drama of the height of the horizon line, where it is placed, if it's placed at the top, more at the top of the paper, obviously more of the foreground is going to be the focal point. If it's a low horizon line, then obviously the sky will take center stage. And so those are some ways that you can kind of manipulate the viewer where they look and what the focal point is. When I last demonstrated a sunset painting, I told you guys that I like to start with the darkest part of the cloud. It's kind of the same concept as starting with the darkest part of a tree. And so I swiped in some very neutral, almost a gray dark turquoise color for this cloud. And what I noticed also about Pastelmat is it does not want to blend like UArt. And so I used that pipe foam just a second ago, and it barely blended any of the pastel out. And I'm not going to do any wet underpainting on this because I just am experimenting right now. But I'm also wanting to just darken a few more areas of this cloud, put in that horizon line, very, very loose here. I'm experimenting and kind of having fun, but really looking at the photo to see where the shadows are of this cloud in relation to where the bright areas of this cloud are. And as I go through this painting, the more pastel layers you have on this Pastelmat, the better it blends, but it really grabs. It's almost a great paper for very direct marks. Since this paper isn't as friendly to blending with the foam, I'm using a little bit harder, more direct marks to get that dark value into the paper. That's an adaptation. Whenever you change your papers or your supplies, if it's not what you're used to, then you have to adapt with whatever you're using. I am going to start cutting in some of the lighter areas of the sky, and I can kind of tap and blend with my finger just slightly. I'm just blocking in color and shape. I want this to be a really dramatic painting. I purposely picked something very dramatic. I love to paint these types of clouds that have that kind of silver lining glow to them where the sun is behind them. And this is a turquoise that I'm using because there are some areas of the sky that there are different layers of clouds going on. There's, of course, the big dark cloud. There's also the very wispy, airy clouds that are kind of behind it and catching a lot of that light. And so my job is to try to capture those different layers of clouds, not just the dark area against the sky. Just as a side note, you'll notice that I took off my clamp that was holding the paper, and the paper actually stuck to my board because it was from a pad. It had a little bit of adhesive on it. So it just actually kind of worked out for me that the paper actually held onto the board without any attachment. So that was kind of neat. Obviously, it's darker towards the higher part of the sky. The horizon line goes up, it's going to get darker. And I am sweeping in, like this is another darker. I'm kind of going for the dark gray turquoises. I find that those create a lot of mood in especially kind of a stormy cloud setting or any kind of nighttime or evening time cloud painting. The dark turquoises are a little greener and they just are a little bit more evocative than, like, say, using a very bright ultramarine or a very bright cobalt. Those tend to tell the viewer it's midday or it's a very bright sunny blue sky. The turquoises especially, those are a little moodier than bright blues. One of my main concerns about this composition was I don't want the clouds to look like fingers. I'm really conscious of the shape of them because sometimes when we paint a sunset, let's be honest, or any kind of clouds, even if we're painting it exactly like a photo, it can almost be a little unrealistic because it's so bright. There's such amazing patterns in the sky and they're hard to convey. And so we have to kind of take them, be very objective about the compositions and see what needs to be done, even if it's slightly changing them a little bit. So now that I have the very dark base of these clouds, I'm going to start adding in some light to them because obviously there's going to be different fluctuations in these clouds. They're going to be flowing. Clouds are water vapor, and so we don't want them to be too harsh, even though there are hard edges in this type of cloud because the sunlight is creating almost a rim light behind and around the edges of this cloud. And what I've done here is I'm actually putting a little bit of that same color in, sweeping it up into areas where I want to emulate that there are different types of clouds, because some of them would be the same color, they're just shaped differently. They're much more gauzy and airy, especially cirrus clouds that are high up in the sky. I also put in some low horizon light, and that was a very light yellow, almost the same color as the paper. And also starting to put in some of this rim light and the highlights of these clouds. And these are very hard marks. I am using the side of my pastel, and you can see that I'm rolling it to indicate the edges of these clouds. I'm really looking here at my photograph so I can see exactly where this light is, and rolling and tapping a hard edge along the edge of that dark cloud form that I created to really emulate that the sun is behind this cloud and pushing that light out and through this atmosphere. I purposefully chose a very tone-based paper for this painting because I wanted these clouds to feel warm. If you don't want to do an underpainting, or if you want to underpaint and you want to paint just a solid toned piece, choosing these warmer colors will automatically make your painting feel warmer. You don't always have to underpaint with a certain color or complementary colors. You can use a toned paper like this or paint in a solid tone as well. I have done that many times to create this very warm glow that's going to come out of these clouds, especially if we're not covering up the complete color of the paper. The more pastel you get on this surface, the easier it is to blend. And so there are some areas, especially down there in the horizon line, and I really put really hard marks. Those are a little easier to blend with your fingertips. Also putting some more light into those high cirrus clouds in the sky, and even making some small little marks because there would be wispy effects going on, little areas of a highly more concentrated little cloud that would be catching the light. I want to say I hardly ever use pure white in a cloud, but I wanted this to be so dramatic. And so this is a schminky white, and that is the lightest color I have. People say don't ever use white in a cloud, but I thought that this painting kind of called for it because I really wanted that really bright glow. This is a piece of charcoal, and I am finalizing this little horizon line, straightening out a little bit. I love a dark tree line in my cloudscapes, I should say, because it just adds that value difference. It really highlights that cloud and that land below. And then also this is a new pastel, and really looking at the photograph here and how the light streams across very, very slightly underneath the cloud, the large dark cloud. And I think the same about clouds as I do trees, how I work darkest to lightest. Of course, some areas I use that pure white, and so that is the lightest you can get. But in areas where it is darker, like even that dark golden that I put on the horizon line before, this is a slightly lighter version where that sunlight would be to show this is where the sun is going to be. And so that way the viewer automatically knows the sun is kind of over there on the right-hand side. It's really showing through and glowing and making this gorgeous setting sun. I also decided I really kind of liked the golden base of the foreground, and so I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to draw this highway like photograph shows. I'm going to keep this kind of golden feel. This would be very typical in my region. We grow a lot of wheat here, and we have a lot of golden fields. And so I love to paint the golden fields. You don't have to paint a highway because I'm really just focusing on the clouds. So this is another example of how you can take your reference photos and make them whatever you want. If you decide, as I went through this painting, I decided I like that golden base foreground, so I'm going to keep it. Okay, so I'm going to start refining some of these edges around the cloud, especially the rim light that I want to capture that effect. And I'm using very direct marks here, rolling my pastel between my thumb and my forefingers. Of course, keep a good hold of your pastel here so it doesn't flip out of your hands and fall on the floor and break. But I really am wanting to capture that light. And so I roll it along the dark edge, and then I kind of fill in that little gap to emulate, once again, that light behind the cloud peeking out and shining up into the sky. Really look at your references in regards to your clouds, because some of them, there are clouds in the distance behind this cloud, the dark cloud that I'm painting, that are catching more light because they are in the distance, and this cloud is blocking the light in my vision, and so it's in shadow while other clouds are more in the light. And this will bring a lot of drama. This will bring a lot of interest to your paintings when you think of the different types of clouds that are in the atmosphere and how they receive light. Making some final very hard marks on this piece, really highlighting that rim light. Also there's a little cloud up in the sky up there at the very top right that's a wispy cloud that's really catching that light. There's also some dark little puffs that aren't catching light. So adding those different types of layers, and I really actually loved working on this paper. It was fun, and I'm glad I have a whole pad of it. There is a buttercup color, a maize color, a dark gray, and a light gray. So I'm excited to use them, and just had a lot of fun with this piece. Hi everybody, it's Bethany, and I'm here in my studio. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you learned something today, I would love it if you would give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and also click that little notification bell so you can know whenever I have a new video coming up. If you'd also love to support this content coming out, I would love it if you would consider visiting my Patreon page. The link is below. I'm so excited to be bringing these lessons to you weekly, and I hope you're excited too. Bye.